next will be a very well-known regional and national poet who's also very noted for his incredible workshop, and he has several books, public collections published as well. And he's the coordinator emeritus of the poetry section of the Newburyport Literary Festival. Please welcome Alfred Nicol.
Thank you, Harris. All right, I'm just going to shout out.
Yes.
So I'm going to do it. I'm always happy to participate in our annual commemoration of the life and work of John Greenleaf Whittier. It seems to me one of the most civilized things we can do. In honoring this great man's memory, we acknowledge a moral bond between the dead and the living, which, when you think about it, inevitably extends to those as yet unborn. Ours is a community of souls, and Whittier's still part of it, a big part of it. Whittier was a moral giant. As for me, I am of but average height in that regard. So the Whittier I love best is the storytelling Whittier, the maker of ballads. The poem of his I'll read today is about a wild ride. It's a playful poem of which he said, "My verse was founded solely on a fragment of rhyme which I heard from one of my early schoolmates. The narrative of the ballad was pure fancy. Of course, Whittier being Whittier, even this story has a moral. It speaks of the fate of a captain who abandoned his sinking ship, leaving his own townspeople on board. Skipper Ireson's Ride. Of all the rides since the birth of time, told in story or sung in rhyme, on Apuleius' golden ass, or one-eyed Calendar's horse of brass, which astride of a human back, Islam's prophet on Al-Barak, the strangest ride that e'er was sped was Ireson's out from Marblehead. Old Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart, tarred and feathered and carried in a cart by the women of Marblehead. Body of turkey, head of owl, wings a droop like a rained-on fowl, feathered and ruffled in every part, Skipper Ireson stood in the cart. Scores of women, old and young, strong of muscle and glib of tongue, pushed and pulled up the rocky lane, shouting and singing the shrill refrain, "Here's Flood Ireson, for his horrid heart torn and feathered and cored in a cart by the women of Marblehead." Wrinkled scolds with hands on hips, girls in bloom of cheek and lips, wild-eyed, free-limbed, such as chase Bacchus round some antique vase, brief of skirt, with ankles bare, loose of kerchief and loose of hair, with conch shells blowing and fish horns twang. Over and over the Maenad sang, "Here's Flood Ireson, for his horrid heart, torn and feathered and cored in a cart by the women of Marblehead." Small pity for him. He sailed away from a sinking ship in Charlotte Bay, sailed away from a sinking wreck with his own townspeople on her deck. "Lay by," they called to him. Back he answered, "Sink or swim, brag if you catch a fish again." And off he sailed through the fog and rain. Old Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart, tarred and feathered and carried in a cart by the women of Marblehead. Fathoms deep in dark Chalore, that wreck shall lie forevermore. Mother and sister, wife and maid looked from the rocks of Marblehead over the moaning and rainy sea, looked for the coming that might not be. What did the winds and the seabirds say of the cruel captain who sailed away? Old Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart tarred and feathered and carried in a cart by the women of Marblehead. Through the street on either side, up flew windows, doors swung wide, sharp-tongued spinsters, old wives gray, treble lent the fish-horns bray, sea-worn grandsires cripple-bound, hulks of old sailors run aground, shook head and fist and hat and cane, and cracked with curses the hoarse refrain, "Here's Flood Ireson, for his hard heart torn and feathered and curd in a cart by the women of Marblehead." Sweetly along the Salem road, bloom of orchard and lilac showed. Little the wicked skipper knew of the fields so green and the sky so blue. Riding there in his sorry trim, like the Indian idol, glum and grim, scarcely he seemed to hear the sound of voices shouting far and near, "Here's Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart torn and feathered and curd in a cart by the women of Marblehead." "Hear me, neighbors," at last he cried. "What to me is this noisy ride? What is the shame that clothes the skin to the nameless horror that lives within? Waking or sleeping, I see a wreck and hear a cry from a reeling deck. Hate me and curse me. I only dread the hand of God and the face of the dead," said old Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart tarred and feathered and carried in a cart by the women of Marblehead. Then the wife of the skipper lost at sea said, "God has touched him. Why should we?" Said an old wife, mourning her only son, "Cut the rogue's tether and let him run." So, with soft relentings and rude excuse, half scorn, half pity, they cut him loose and gave him a cloak to hide him in and left him alone with his shame and his sin. Poor Floyd Ireson, for his hard heart tarred and feathered and carried in a cart by the women of Marblehead. Now, the poem of my own that I'll read today also involves a wild ride and a narrow escape from death. But this is a short ride, thus a short poem. It's a haiku, albeit a haiku with a title. After the Carnival. Alive, 3 ants crawl from a piece of kettle corn the sparrow let fall. So a lot of action took place in those 3 lines. You may have missed some, so I'm going to rewind the tape and play it again. After the Carnival. Alive, 3 ants crawl from a piece of kettle corn the sparrow let fall.